The Darkness Taipei. By Frank Fasano. Introduction. Caveat Lector. I say this because some books are dangerous. Most works can be picked up and put down, leaving you unchanged. I can make you no such promise. In my humble opinion, every truly fascinating manuscript will give you answers, even if the questions were unknown to you. Knowledge. True knowledge is not a charming collection of factoids to be regurgitated on demand or request. I have come to believe that learning is a process that shakes you to the very foundation of your being. There are many secrets that give you a glimpse into the other worlds. But be warned. Once you have opened your mind to the darker possibilities, it will never again be closed. This Pandora's box has no lid, no hinges, and no lock. The only way to see what is contained within is to smash it to bits. This is my attempt to document the events that transpired, and it is my humble offering to you, the reader. So caveat lector. Reader, beware. Or you may receive your own invitation to the dance. Call me Thomas. This is my name, even though most people either fail to ask for it or just forget it altogether. The story, on the other hand, is not mine. Regardless, I have decided to tell it. My name may find mention before this tale reaches its conclusion. We'll just have to wait and see. As I write these words, the dawn has broken. The sun is shining bright, and hope is easy to find in your heart. The blackest night has passed, and the shadows of malevolence have grown thin. The evils of the world have retreated once again into the depths, awaiting darkness's cold caress. Hope also springs new with the first light of morning. Regrettably, it is often slain with the setting of the sun. Our lives can be magnificent journeys if we remove the limitations of our own misconceptions. On the other hand, this is a very dangerous endeavor. Our misconceptions of the world are our anchor and our shield. They hold us back from seeing what the world really contains. They also protect us from what we may not be prepared to confront. Confronting the unknown can be the most important part of this magnificent journey we know as life. In the immensity of time, a human life is as a journey of a drop of rain, plummeting to the earth, to eternity. Our lives are but a moment, an hour, or a day. But then again, so much can happen in just a day. Que Deus vult perdere, demented prius. Original source unknown, whom the gods would destroy. They first drive mad. Excerpt from the GHASD. Gideon's Handbook for the Accidental Supernatural Tourist. The GHASD was created to help you avoid becoming trapped in the darker worlds. However, the current management feels that the most recent increase in its popularity is due to people trying to find the breaches in the pallium. Therefore, all entries have been re-edited with this in mind. Please note, if you wish to avoid the darkness, all you need do is apply a reversed logic to the stated techniques. I.e., if you stay near home and remain in familiar surroundings, the chances of seeing anything but the mundane is highly unlikely. Travel tip number 1. The way to find the darker worlds is look on the ordinary world in a new way. This is best accomplished in a place you have never before been. Finding that which is hidden is far from easy. Unfortunately, it is possible. The pallium of the dance is a sorry shroud for anyone looking with open eyes. It is very difficult to cross the pallium. However, for most of those who have, returning seems to be nearly impossible. You may wish to be very certain before you go looking for that which you do not understand. The best time to find the darker world is after the twilight, when creatures can bask in the full splendor of the darkness. There is no door in the conventional sense of the word. First, find the places where people congregate after dark. It is easy to find the nightlife in any city. Just follow the people. Look for the goths and the posers, or any group that attempts to worship or glorify death and darkness. When you are on the tube, follow them, see where they go and watch what they do. If you want to know if these erroneous youths in black are part of the dance, the answer is no. They are part of the dance in the same way the public flocks to places where famous people have been. This is done with the misguided idea that it will create a deeper connection with their idol or false idols. Whatever the case may be, yet they sometimes congregate in the places where the damned have been. You will need to try this repeatedly. It would be very surprising if you could find such a venue on your first attempt, or even your 21st. There are many other ways to locate the breaches in the pallium, however this is the only one we can legally condone. So finding where the damned have been is the only method we will advance at this time. Once you find it, there will always be signs to lead you to a darker place. These signs will not consist of worded placards. The signs we speak of consist of people, things, feelings and emotions. Following the feelings of dread. Not to mention the sensation that the hairs on the back of your neck are being played with by unseen fingers, this is a good start. Other sensations include dizziness, disorientation, lightheadedness, nausea, paranoia, and a sudden feeling of awaking in a place and not knowing how you got there. Please note you may disregard these sensations if you had a few too many pints at the pub or popped some X the night before. Legal notice and disclaimer. In case of personal injury, death and/or damnation, the writers, editors, and management of GHASD, or Gideon's Handbook for the Accidental Supernatural Tourist are a limited partnership incorporated and a registered trademark, all rights reserved. We accept no liability, responsibility, blame or fault of any kind for the misuse of information contained within. We warn all readers to forget about any desire to know more of the world across the pallium than they can find in their local public library. This information is provided for the purposes of entertainment only. In no way do we encourage, recommend, or condone searching for, and especially crossing the pallium between our world and any other. Asian nightlife. The establishment was underground and fulfilled both sentiments of the word. This little slice of Gomorrah had no sign to show its purpose or presence. The only indication of its existence was a short row of steps leading to an intimidating battleship grey door. Upon entering, the foreigner was assailed by the strong aromas that hung even thicker than the dismal gloom. The smell of stale beer, dime store perfume, and dreadfully cheap Chinese cigarettes were competing hard to overwhelm his senses. The sun would be breaking in less than 2 hours and the patrons had thinned to the last call crowd. Excuse the pun, but last call is a foreign concept in this kind of dive. Bars like this never seemed to close unless they missed a non-tax deductible donation to their local officials. It was that magical time of the evening when beauty can suddenly blossom and come to full efflorescence. For example, women who may have been 4s at 2 a.m. have worked their way up to 7s by this late hour. One neon-clad member of the fairer sex could have even passed for an 8. If you had your beer goggles firmly in place. The tall foreigner walked over to the bar and politely said Dao Yixia, the common Mandarin term for excuse me. Failing to get the bartender's attention was frustrating. It was strange that only one of the bar patrons had shown any notice of his arrival. The small man sitting on the stool began to talk to the foreigner to his left. Almost as often as he spoke to the empty stool to his right. He was inebriated past the point of being the least bit coherent. He may have been speaking Mandarin, Hokkien, Japanese, or for that matter English, German, or French. He was so far past gone it didn't matter. By the look of his garments, it was hard to fathom where the money for the bender had come from. The brown shorts he wore were threadbare, and stained an even darker brown in numerous places. His white t-shirt, if that was in fact the color chosen by the manufacturer, could never again be returned to such a hue. Many of the large gaping holes in the cotton revealed flesh pulled tight over fragile ribs. The friendly but frail man looked much more in need of nutrition than libation. The bartender, on the other hand, was neither chatty nor friendly. He seemed to be just rude and ignored the man standing before him. The newcomer hated this most common of Asian games. You could call it the ignore it until it goes away mindset. The foreigner suspected that somewhere in the extensive library of compendiums called the Idiot's Guides, one volume had escaped him. There must have been The Idiot's Guide to Being an Ostrich. Even if all his inquiries had proven futile, the large black duffel bag that was in his left hand found its way to the top of the bar with a heavy metallic clang. And the barman suddenly became attentive. The new arrival looked down with a weary smile that was a poor disguise for a growing lack of patience. He handed a $100 new Taiwan dollar, note to the barman, and in broken Chinese asked for a fresh bill for the jukebox. After what must have been a great effort, the tattooed man managed to return from the till. It had only taken him about 5 minutes. Miraculously, he had located an even more worn and tattered red note. By this point, the foreigner was more than a little irritated. The smirk on the bartender's face did not help. The newcomer opened one of the bag's zippers in a slow and deliberate manner that managed to attract the attention of the other bar patrons. If they had not moved, you may have mistaken them for mannequins. He drew out a heavy pair of goggles and pulled them down over his jade eyes. With the flick of a switch they flared to life. The soft glow and gentle hum that they emitted always felt soothing to the man who wore them. He disregarded the fact that the effect on bystanders was usually quite the opposite. The new arrival scrutinized each of the bar patrons and the lone member of the staff. He grabbed the small man sitting at the bar near him and dragged him to the door. Literally. Holding the man at arm's length was done in an attempt to avoid his strong aroma. It was not at all successful, and the foreigner's nose twisted at the stench. He could smell body odor, betel nut, and the faint taint of urine. All these odors intermingled with even more foul substances, which he had no desire to ponder. This is not a statement that Asians are unclean. Quite the contrary. However, anyone who has traveled outside their own country will note that every people have a distinctly unique aroma that is all their own. In the case of the aromatic drunk, the foreigner thought him to be one who did not exist. Or at the very least he was residentially challenged. He stood the drunken man up outside at the bottom of the short row of stairs that descended to the pub, ignoring the protests of the bartender. The large nearly empty bottle of Zizao beer in the hand of the drunk was unaffected by the trip. The small man drank the last of it quickly. The foreigner reached into a pocket and pulled out the red bill, and a few others of different colors and higher denominations. He thrust them into the drunk's free hand. He held the hand in front of the small man's face until there was a look of recognition. After he was certain that the man knew what he had, the foreigner spoke in slow Mandarin saying, "Go get something to eat." The small drunk held the money up high above his head for the entire world to see, shouting his drink order as he tried to re-enter the pub. However, he found the way to be blocked. Firm insistent hands turned the small man around and thrust him firmly in the direction of the steps. The kind voice repeated again, "Go get something to eat." The former patron continued to speak in a soft affable tone to no one in particular as the door was closed. A sign on the front door to the pub was printed in Chinese and English. It had "Come in" on one side and "Go away" on the other. The "Go away" side was faced out to the street and all but covered the small window. Then came 5 heavy clicks as the man locked the door with every device it had to offer. With the final click, a heavy 2-inch thick piece of steel secured the door from left to right. Turning, he walked back to the bar, slowly counting to himself. He regarded the bartender with a calculating eye. The Asian's smirk was gone, and he now looked a little pale. The soft green glow of the goggles may have concealed the jade eyes. However, it failed to hide his growing anger. The smaller man must have categorized the foreigner as trouble, and he had decided to deal with him decisively. Reaching under the bar, the tattooed man retrieved a baseball bat. Without the slightest hesitation, he swung it at his newest and least favorite patron. The larger man leapt forward like an overwound spring, releasing all its potential energy. A muscular arm reached across the bar and grasped the wood in a vice-like grip. The foreigner caught the bat early in the swing and jerked it from the smaller man's grasp. Then he moved back as swiftly as he had gone forward with the bat now in his possession. He regarded the weapon with the slow perusal that a collector would give to a cheap knockoff. Shaking his head, the foreigner's only comment was, "Who the hell is Chen Jingfeng?" As the bat was dropped to the floor, the bartender's shoulder popped, causing his face to contort in agony as his reach did truly exceed his grasp. He examined his empty hands in surprise and looked up at the tall man with a torrent of emotions. Surprise, disbelief, apprehension, trepidation, and concern quickly congealed into dread. A second zipper was opened, and a long black Remington 12 gauge was removed and slung over the foreigner's left shoulder. He reached under his jacket and pulled out a heavy nickel-plated pistol from the arch of his back. Walking to the jukebox, he pulled the gun's hammer back and took aim. Squeezing the trigger caused an echoing eruption of light and sound. The bartender jumped in surprise. Naturally, the patrons failed to show any reaction to the event. One would expect most people in a bar at this hour to have slow responses. They watched the events as if they were part of a mosaic on the wall. It was unnerving to see this level of disconnection with the world. Did they believe that these proceedings were none of their concern? Or, could it be this was a regular occurrence? Just another Thursday night. The jukebox's faceplate squeaked open on hinges that had not known the touch of oil in many years. In an indifferent manner, he studied the inner workings of the machine until he found the credit lever and racked up a few free songs. It was practically an omen. He pushed G7 4 times. The rhythm started in a pounding backbeat. The music was loud, and when the vocals kicked in, the lyrics started. All the times have come, here but now they've gone. The seasons don't fear the reaper, nor do the wind and the sun and the rain. The chorus kicked in. We can be like they are. And the second chorus resounded. Don't fear the Reaper. The female vocalist singing this heavy metal remake was not what he had expected. But he liked it. He returned a little upset that his usual entrance was ruined by his lack of functional currency. Sometimes all we really have is our work. And if this is the case, then you need to do it with the utmost proficiency and professionalism. The barman was not just tattooed. He had given his entire body to the Rembrandts of the flesh. One of the tattoos in particular caught the attention of the foreigner. Jason was tattooed on the right arm of the barman, ascending from wrist to elbow. The foreigner thought of two possibilities. It was either his name, or the name of his gay lover. Regardless of what the fact was, he had decided to call him Jason from this point on. Jason stood as tall as a 5'2" man could and said, "What you want?" The foreigner ignored him for a minute, examining the interlocking patterns of water stains on the long row of wood that separated them. If there was a cryptic message contained there, he could not decipher it. Jason opened his mouth to speak again, but was interrupted. Without looking at him, the foreigner said, "A beer, no glass, thanks." A tall cold bottle was retrieved quickly and placed before him on the once beautiful mahogany. The nickel-plated Colt 1911 was laid on the bar and the beer was retrieved. The tall bottle was cold to the touch, and he enjoyed the sensation for a moment. The night was hot and stagnant, so the watery beer brought welcome relief. The large bottle was emptied in a single pass just as the first playing of the song ended. A soft series of beeps could be heard in the gap between the first and second playing. Finally, the foreigner spoke again. "I am going to ask you some questions." He looked up from the bar and lifted the goggles slowly. When he was looking hard into Jason's eyes, he continued, "You will tell me what I want to know, or—" There was a pause that hung heavy in the room for a moment. Then he lowered the goggles again and finished. "Let's just say you don't want to see my darker side. I'm kind of on a tight schedule, so let's get this over with." The empty bottle was placed on the bar between the two men, and a picture was removed from an inner pocket and handed to Jason. The bartender eyed the gun that lay on the bar between them in a calculating way. The foreigner's smile perked up a bit as he waited to see if the other man had a move to make. Jason did not make a play for the pistol. He only showed the tattoo of a beautiful bamboo stalk on his left arm. It ran from the bartender's wrist to elbow. With the nervous twitching of his wrist, it appeared to be blown by an unseen typhoon. It was what the man asking the questions had expected, and yet he was disappointed. The green-eyed foreigner knew what the artwork meant, but played dumb. He picked the nickel-plated .45 up off of the bar, cocked the hammer again, and aimed at Jason's left knee. What happened to him? I know he came in here. I know he never left. And I know you were here when it all went down. The last part was a lie. But he was not going to give Jason any room to wiggle. The photograph showed a young man with innocent eyes and an easy smile. The background was a mountain peak with soft white clouds and a deep blue sky. That vast blue void looked bigger than any sky on earth had a right to be. The young man had that look of happy contentment that you could never find again after the age of 30. Jason nodded and said, "You not like it?" The large man dropped the charade and snapped in crisp, fluent Mandarin. "Speak Chinese, your Chinglish hurts my head." Jason looked as if the comment had wounded him. But regardless, he continued in Mandarin. The Chinese was full of arcane terms and metaphors that the foreigner now knew well after doing this work for a while. They make their own language for this, just like in drug deals. You never call cocaine cocaine, you call it Pepsi, Twinkies, gumballs, or something else obscure. Regardless of how they say it. The bottom line was bad. It was obvious that the young man he was looking for would not be returning to his family unharmed. The fact that the young man was referred to as a snack. No, snack was not the right word. The word was arcane Mandarin, and was more like delicacy. This statement all but guaranteed that the young man in question had seen his last blue sky. Where is he now? Jason looked sheepish and answered. In the sewers, I guess. Shit. Was all the green-eyed man could say. Jason stopped himself from showing his amusement. But only just barely. The foreigner could not help but consider the idea. In Asia, you were not allowed to flush toilet paper down the drain. You had to put it in a little waste paper basket. But the damned had enough room to store bodies down there. The taller man thought to himself. If I had $1 for every time I had to go down to the sewers for a body. He reevaluated the fact that he would get a lot more than $1 for getting the body back. This was of some consolation. The tall man spoke slowly, saying, Jason, if you are United Bamboo Tong. Tuanjizu Tong. Tell Uncle Jang and Lo. The White Wolf, there is no profit working for the dark. This made the smaller man angry. In Taiwan, no one told the Bamboo Union what to do. However, he was not eager to explain this while looking down a gun barrel that looked like a water pipe. Jason tried to give the man a hard look. Failed? And just nodded. There was no reaction or emotion emitted from the goggles. Just a hum and a soft glow. Wanting to make certain the message would not be forgotten. He shot the bartender twice. The first round entered Jason's right knee, and the second into the left. The two shots came so fast that they could have been one. Jason had fallen to the floor before the look of shock had a chance to set in. There was a nearly perceptible change, a hardening of the features as the foreigner transformed into the hunter. The hunter returned the pistol to the holster under his jacket. A second later, Jason began to scream and curse in crude Mandarin. He promised vengeance and made every threat imaginable. He even ranted about the foreigner being cast down to the 18th level of Diyu, Chinese hell. There was a very interesting reference to being buggered by Yanluo Wang, the Chinese king of hell, personally. This brought a grin to the hunter's face. He hated to hear the same threats again and again. He gave Jason credit not only for creativity, but also for style. All things considered, he thought that under different circumstances he could have been a cool guy to hang out with. The other patrons were as motionless as corpses on a slab. The hunter fumbled with the shotgun. Somehow it had become entangled with the hood of his black windbreaker. He gave the crowd an apologetic look and a smile that said, "Sorry, I will be with you in just one moment." An uncomfortable feeling came over the hunter as the song started playing for the third time. Again he had heard the soft beeping between plays, however he could not place it. He did not think it was the jukebox but was unsure. He quickly dismissed his concerns and focused on the job at hand. The hunter rolled down sleeves of fine metal mesh that had been unseen beneath his jacket and heavy work shirt. He quickly slid on a pair of silvery mesh gloves. He began to unroll a mesh hood from under his collar, but after looking around the room decided it was not needed. He chalked this job up to a simple house cleaning, just a few mosquitoes. None of them even looked the least bit like a leech. He again removed the shotgun from his shoulder. In a generally sexist manner, he shot the nearest male. He had been sitting and holding a half-empty glass since the hunter entered. The dark grey suit it wore was crumpled and a little worn, and you would have passed him on a dark street without a second thought. If the hunter had to pick a word to describe the face, he may have said congenial. But if he had to describe the eyes, the only words that came to mind were cold and vacant. The now falling figure had been further away than the two females behind him. Women's lib aside, he did not think they would complain about this incident of sexual discrimination, at any rate not in this world. He walked around the long horseshoe-shaped mahogany bar located near the center of this dungeon-like refuge. The figure had been knocked off the stool, toppling one of the tables and a few chairs. It was looking up at the intruder with scorn and disdain. It was now spitting blood past an impressive pair of fangs. Those teeth seemed long for a mosquito, but this fact too was dismissed. The hunter thought those fangs must have seen a lot of blood in their time. It is only fitting that the last time they see blood, it is its own, well, possibly some of it. The intruder racked his shotgun again and leveled it at the head of the poor damned soul. The creature began to let out a demonic shriek that caused the hunter's vision to blur and hands to shake. He could feel his world closing in on him. Overwhelming feelings of doubt and uncertainty assailed him, overpowering his mind. Was the figure moving or was the room shaking? He could not tell. Fear gripped his heart with cold talons and was squeezing the life from him. Then, amidst all the confusion, he heard a voice. It was loud and clear, it was an amalgamation of all who had taught him honor and discipline. It went through the simple instruction for the proper operation of the M12 pump-action shotgun. First rack, aim, then squeeze, and if needed, repeat. He followed the orders and said Semper Fi as he squeezed the trigger. Fortuitously, the vile form ceased to produce that sickening echo of death the moment its head vanished. Its cranium became a cone-shaped splattering of viscous fluid. The thick sticky residue was spread across the floor, and halfway up the wall behind it. The hunter held his breath and took a few steps back. Just as the now headless corpse began to produce reams of thick green vapor. A fog that reeked of ammonia quickly floated to the low ceiling of the windowless basement. He was still recovering from the horrific scream. And only had a second to think. He had never heard even a leech make such a sound. This was not going to be as simple as he had hoped. Emotions were still overwhelming his mind. All of the emotions that he denied himself were flowing forth from him. Pain, doubt, and sorrow were released from their secret place. These were the things that he feared more than death or damnation. He confronted and consumed them with equal part vengeance and solitude. That was the only way he could make them palatable. However, this was too much. Too fast. It made him feel like a child hiding under his bed. Only to find out what he was hiding from was right there behind him in the dark. His inner voice screamed, leaving a painful echo. Again and again, the voice in his head screamed. Focus, focus, focus. The fear of that voice surpassed all other things. It was greater than his doubt. Greater than his fear of death. And even greater than his fear of damnation. The echo faded into the darkness, and it uttered one more word that far surpassed all other ideas. In a soft sadistic whisper. It said simply, revenge. A tight grin slid back to the hunter's face. And he slid back into the persona of self-confident predator. The hunter had no time to think about how he thought it should be. He needed to focus all his attention on how it was. A second male was approaching him very swiftly and he chambered another shell. Just as a shadow moved in the periphery of his vision. He squeezed the trigger. Hitting the advancing creature center mass. Quickly turning. He saw what was trying to move in behind him. One slender woman had retrieved the bat from the floor where he had discarded it. Maybe once she had been beautiful. But now she looked like a perverted fantasy of a schoolgirl from hell. She or it was in mid-transformation and getting uglier by the moment. Her pale Asian complexion went from a soft talc white to ashen grey. Her shapely form seemed to tighten and become desiccated right before his eyes. Her soft and full bosom shrank and withered, as small fangs extended and lengthened, filling the corners of her mouth, completing the look. If she was a student, she would have been held back a few decades. She wore a red and green plaid skirt, and a tight white shirt open to show her red bra. The white garment was 2 sizes too small in an attempt to overemphasize too petite breasts. This may have been cute if she was 20 years younger and still breathing. The effect on this creature was more disturbing than sexy. Somewhere along the way the woman, no, creature had become a second-rate hooker. Sometime after that, the second-rate hooker had become one of the damned, and at this very moment it was looking like the demented love child of Attila the Hun and Babe Ruth. The bat whistled as it came down in an overhead swing. Ducking, he raised the shotgun above his head, deflecting the blow just like in boot camp. In boot camp he had done this 1,000 times with a big Q-tip that the drill instructors at Paris Island called a pugil stick. The next Q-tip maneuver was to stand up and push your opponent away while executing a swift blow to the head with the stock, or butt of the rifle. The tactic worked like a charm. When the stock of his weapon struck the creature's skull and jaw, it produced a very loud sharp noise. The sound of cracking bones would have made the hunter feel nauseous just a year ago. Now, the sound rated very low on his personal disgusto-shitometer, DOSOM, it had been some year. She slumped to the floor, but the hunter knew better than to count her out of the fight. He looked around the room and in a moment sized up the state of affairs. If he had to give a sit/rep or situation report, for you non-military people, it would have been short. The sit/rep could be put into 5 words: situation normal, all fucked up. 1 male human down behind the bar. 1 male damned out of the game. Another wounded but trying to stand. The 3rd male uninjured and coming around the bar, 1 female playing possum, 2 females approaching cautiously between him and the front door. Okay, now it is time to finish it. Racking the shotgun did not produce the usual sound. The usual and desired sound being 2 distinct and nearly uniformed double clicks. The weapon also failed to eject the spent shell. At best, you could say it gave an unfulfilling half-click. He tried to rack the shotgun again with more force this time, but it was a no-go. A cursory glance at the tube of the weapon showed it to be badly dented. This not only prevented the shells from sliding smoothly, it also made it impossible to move the slide grip below the dent in the damaged tube, a function that is vital for the proper operation of this weapon. With a brief cursing of the weapon, he threw the shotgun to the floor and removed the pistol from the arch of his back. 5 rounds was the first thought in his mind. The hunter carefully circled around the body that was now lying face down on the floor. He wanted to stand where he had maximum visibility on all that was happening around him, before he finished off this bitch of a damned soul. He knew she was only playing possum, standard mosquito tactics. Obviously, Evil Dead was required viewing for all of the newly damned. She must have had eyes in the back of her head. He had only taken his eyes off of her for a fraction of a second to glance at the approaching male. That was the moment she chose to jump up and play peekaboo, thrusting her claws hard into his chest and gouging them as deep as she could. The thick denim work shirt he wore was instantly in tatters. The hunter gasped in pain and surprise. The creature continued pulling its nails downward, producing a loud ripping sound. The pain was so vivid it was as if he could feel the claws ripping out his spine, and stealing the last gasps of air from his lungs. The voice in his head had only one thing to say: "You really screwed up this time." He didn't argue. She had even started to cut his pants and thick leather belt as the barrel was placed to her temple. 2 squeezes of the trigger placed a healthy 30 grams of lead in its cranium, through its cranium. The .45 caliber wadcutters are not the preferred ammunition to use on the damned. Regardless, at this range the creature would require a little nap before the next round of peekaboo. He tried to avoid stepping in the impressive splatter before him. No matter how impressive it looked, he'd never count them out while they still had a head. He was focusing: if he was going to die in this fetid place, he wanted to take as many of them with him as possible. If he got his wish, the next one he dispatched was going to be the bitch lying face down on the floor. The hunter stumbled back a few steps to the wall and braced himself against it. He swung the heavy pistol back and forth like the pendulum of a grandfather clock. He aimed at the male, causing it to duck quickly behind the bar. Then, when he saw the females move, he would focus his attention on them. The gun felt heavier and heavier with each swing from left to right. The vile ones were willing to wait until he succumbed to his injuries rather than risking being shot. The pain began to subside and the hunter's vision cleared to the surprise of all, including the hunter. He scanned the room again, this time paying particular attention to the fangs and body language. The uninjured male had longer fangs than the others, and seemed to move with a fluidity that he had never seen in the damned before. It was now moving forward as it barked orders in some strange tongue that was unknown to the hunter. The 2 females were still taking a bit of cover behind the bar. Their short fangs and slower reactions identified them as mosquitoes, or so the hunter hoped. He felt where the nails had scratched, but he did not find his blood gushing or his intestines hanging to the floor. The metal mesh of his silvery second skin seemed to be intact. Now he wished he had put on the hood of the ultra-modern suit of chainmail armor. The clean, sleek metal was now visible through the remains of his shirt, and he cursed his own impulsiveness. The voice in his head barked at him: "Never underestimate the enemy." He said, "Thanks for that little bit of 20/20 hindsight," and asked, "Any guidance, advice or recommendation on the current situation?" There was a moment of either reflection or evaluation, then the voice resounded: "Kill them all and get the hell out of here. Fast." He thought, "No, I was planning on having a tea party, with crumpets, cakes and cucumber sand." But then it occurred to him, that this might not be the best time. An argument with this very loquacious aspect of his superego would not help his current situation. They agreed to table the discussion until later. The hunter made his way towards the wounded male, and at 3 paces he placed 2 good shots into the damned soul that was just getting to its feet. It appeared to be about to jump at him when the first shot caught him in the crown and jerked its head back. The second looked much less effective as it entered the soft tissue of the throat, and no exit wound was apparent. The last male was in mid-stride, so the hunter did not have time to draw a bead on the head. He put 1 round center mass. The slide of the pistol locked back in its rear position. This was expected. The weapon was empty. He dropped to one knee as he pushed the magazine release. He loaded a fresh 7 rounds. This well-rehearsed series of movements was done before the empty magazine hit the floor. The slide release was skillfully flicked with a thumb and the slide came forward, chambering the first round of the fresh clip. The creature that had been moving forward was now reconsidering its options with all its momentum spent, in no small part by the impact of the bullet. Still some 10 feet from the hunter it yelled, "Get him!" in Chinese, as if to someone standing behind the hunter. This trick was as old as the hills and the experienced veteran would not fall for it. The creature turned in fear of having to spend 24/7 in hell, and made a dive for the cover that the thick wood of the bar would provide. The first shot was perfect as far as GSWs, or gunshot wounds, go. It entered directly behind the creature's right ear. The second shot left something to be desired. It was most likely placed in the floor next to the heavy boot of the gun-wielding hunter. This was not for lack of training or experience, or even from what police call shooter's rage. The primary cause of his inaccurate fire was his being struck by a large object with great force. The object in question was about 5 feet tall with long bleached blonde hair, sharp nails, a red mini-skirt, and a black tube top. It was currently screeching as it tried to remove his lungs through his clavicles. Its long red painted claws encountered the thin yet resilient armor. When the creature failed to find flesh or to draw blood, it decided to try a different tactic. With great force, like a skilled softball pitcher, she brought her nails up hard into his groin. The scarlet talons failed to penetrate the armor, nevertheless, the impact was felt. The hunter winced in pain, yet he still noted the advance of the other uninjured female. The approaching creature must have believed his attention was completely diverted. True, the groin shot may have been more than a little distracting, but the clothes of the creature created a blur of clashing neon colors that could not be ignored. Just like in nature, bright colors signaled danger. He didn't hesitate to open fire. The hunter's first shot was made from a point of great disadvantage. The feeling that your testicles are currently occupying the space just below your Adam's apple will distract even the most disciplined of individuals. The first round came after a jerk of the trigger and went through her shoulder. She screamed and cried out in pain. It was not a blood-curdling scream, nor even the mind-wrenching voice of death that his first kill here had made. The sound was human, sorrowful, and was more disturbing than even death itself. The most disturbing part was that in some strange way the scream was familiar. The hunter knew what he had to do. The goggles made it clear that she was already dead. It was hard to see her thermal signature. There must have been less than a 10-degree variant between her body and the cold stale air of the basement. But there was just something so familiar about her. What made him think this was not clear? It doesn't matter what it was, the relevant fact became that the hunter made the worst mistake of his life. He hesitated. Being shot was not a deterrent to the damned creature, and only removed all doubt about what she had to do. With just a step, she leapt and was on him. If these women were alive, this experience would have been the kind of thing that men pay 2,000 baht for in Thailand, or so I have been told. Considering the fact that the hunter was living meat in an undead sandwich, you would have to be a very strange man to want this. That's not to say you couldn't find a market for such entertainment. Who knows, this may be the next big fad with the Japanese or the French. At the very least, you could make a buck off the DVD rights. The creature was so close he could feel the cold radiating off of its body. The smell of perfume was almost welcome as opposed to the strong ammonia vapor that made him want to spit. It was the smell of autumn flowers. That is, if the smell of autumn flowers had ever been harvested, preserved, and bottled by the Coca-Cola Bottling Company of Cincinnati, Ohio. She may smell of perfume, and she may even look like a woman, but under the guise, he could smell the decrepitude. The faint odor of last week's cut grass mixed with that smell of necrosis that you get when you visit an old nursing home. It was not the smell of things waiting to die. It was the smell of death, long past its expiration date. It was the smell that kept him from any delusion about what he was doing battle with. He could not think of it as a woman. If he did, he probably could never bring himself to kill her. Correction it. What was before him had once been a woman, she may have once had hopes and dreams. But now there was only a primal hunger, death in sheep's clothing. What possessed this once human body was not human, and had probably never been. The damned seemed to have a lot of neat tricks. They could even walk and talk like the person they once had been. Some could even remember the names of old friends their former self once knew. But, if it waddles like a duck, quacks like a duck, has sharp fangs and wants to kill you, it's not a duck, at least not anymore, trust me on this one. It was now just a hunger. A hunger that fed on pain and suffering. It could only survive by killing the living, and the living had to be human. It was damnation in the human guise, just a walking talking skin suit leading others into sin.